All right. Hello, everybody. So, my name is Corey Gwynn. I am a solutions architect with Cisco Meraki. And today I'm going to be talking to you about APIs, specifically our newest addition, which is our webhook capabilities. Just kind of a show of hands for our audience. Who's actually worked with the Meraki dashboard? All right, great. So most of you have worked with Meraki dashboard. I don't have to sell you on that dream. We're good to go. But there's a challenge sometimes with the Meraki dashboard, is that you don't always want to be staring at it. You know, even if it's really beautiful, you know, you still just want to be kind of notified when something gets changed, right? Instead of just waiting for a red light or a green light to turn red or vice versa. So, you know, naturally we have things like email alerts, but then again, email is somewhat challenging to manage. I am constantly struggling at managing an email inbox. I can only imagine if I was making a service based off of my emails. It would be a pretty awful business. So today, we're going to just walk through effectively what webhooks are, what Meraki alerts are. I'm going to show you a couple of development tools so that you can kind of learn and explore with them, test if you're going to start building your own services. And then I'm going to go through a couple of demos, you know, just quick proof of concepts, things that I've built. I'm using things like Google Sheets, Node-RED, and then I did a quick PagerDuty integration because our IT used it. So I just want to see if I could do it. So basically, when we think about Meraki as a whole, it's no longer just cloud managed wireless. I mean, that's where we started in like 2006, but we've moved a long way since then. And then it really became like cloud managed IT. It's all of your hardware, anything from access points, switches, firewalls, into new features like cameras, etc. And that's always been through the dashboard itself. That has been our experience, and that's what people would think of when we say the cloud. But really, the cloud is this collection of servers that we have and data centers that are doing a lot of the hard work for you, and that's the important part. And we build a dashboard so that you can interact with that, which is great, and we make it really intuitive. We eliminate the requirement for a command line interface, but sometimes that falls short, and that's when it only takes 2 clicks to make a change to a network. But I have 1,000 networks, and now that's 4,000 clicks. And now I'm wanting to automate something like that. And that's where the API story starts to really take shape. The same goes, I may not want to always pull in information just to see if anything changes. And this is where webhooks come into play, where we're going to starting to want to just push information out with an API. So to kind of take a look at where we're coming from, we have the Meraki platform now, and this is just a cloud interface. And then we have a dashboard to that. But now we are offering several APIs that allow you to interact with the Meraki cloud, whether it is to configure your network, to monitor it, to make changes to it, or you can treat it as sort of a value-added service where I can leverage all of my Meraki access points to listen for wireless clients or Bluetooth beacons, and then start doing triangulation, or you might want to do like wayfinding apps. And that's with your existing wireless deployment. Now, and again, you may also want to provide some form of interaction with the customer, right? If they're joining your hotspot, you may be required to acknowledge what this network is. They may need to acknowledge that they agree to your terms of service, a little bit of branding, a little bit of tailored messaging. Our API allows you to customize that experience, tie it in with your own, say, hotel management system, or your own, back-end CRM to validate people as they connect to your network. So these are just a sampling of some of the APIs. We're coming out with new concepts, new frameworks now all the time, because again, it's more about providing access simply to our customers in any type of interface that they need, even if it's just not a classic dashboard. So when I start looking at the monitoring concept of it, so we're going to focus on more the dashboard API world, where it's configuration and monitoring. One of the challenges here is that, again, you may want to get an update if my devices are online or if they've come offline, right? So I could pull the API every 5 minutes to see the state of each one of my devices. Well, that's going to start causing problems over time, because you may find you're wanting to monitor a lot of other components. And there is generally a rate limit on the API of 5 calls per second. And you can start really pushing that if you're polling like crazy, and if you have a growing network, and you build applications that are just waiting to see if something's changed, and so they're constantly polling. And so it doesn't scale very well. And so in this scenario, you only want to poll when it's like long information, like give me the average of the past 7 days. Okay, that's an easy REST API call. We can do a GET request. But if you're trying to meet an SLA or to generate a service ticket, you're going to want to just know right then and now, and you're not going to want to have to poll for it. And so that's where the webhooks would come in, and it would say, tell me if a device has gone offline. Tell me if it's come back online, so then I can maybe close out a ticket. That's where webhooks is going to really start to give you some of that flexibility. So now, instead of sending an email alert when any of these changes occur, or you monitoring some event log or syslog, now we're just going to send you a trigger, which is called a webhook. And that's going to go to your receiving service. Now, a receiving service is really just a web server that accepts a post, right? And so with that basic concept in mind, you can actually make a lot of things a webhook receiver. Anything from just a web app you're working on, to tying in with Zapier, to tying in with a bunch of other services like PagerDuty or SolarWinds or Zendesk. Each one of these is just going to basically stand up a webhook receiver. It just accepts a post, or you may have to build some little transformer that accepts a post and then kind of molds the data and then shoves it into whatever service you want, okay? But really, a webhook is, again, just a little bit of JSON. It basically contains the alert ID, the alert type. So is it a settings changed or is it a device failure? And it's going to have some metadata with it. And really, it's just you shoving it into places like a Google spreadsheet or a WebEx Teams room, or again, some sort of notification service. So enough slides for a minute. I'm going to kind of just show you a quick overview here, and then I'm going to dive into actually configuring the Meraki dashboard, configuring some alerts, and really having a play with what this data looks like. But for those who just want to get a quick glance, we first have to configure our alerts. Okay, so all you have to do is go into your dashboard under network-wide, you go to your alert settings. Then from there, it's really just 3 steps, and all you're doing now, instead of adding an email to the alert service that you want to send, you're now adding an HTTP server, okay? So you just name that server, something like PagerDuty or webhook test, and you put in the URL for that post. You can then optionally add a shared secret. It's probably smart just for security, but all that really does is help to verify that this was Meraki sending it to you and not someone else who just sent something to your web server. So you as the receiver can verify that. So once you've created the server, you can then effectively select whatever alerts you want, and then you can add that new server as a recipient. So either the catch-all for default recipients, or maybe you have specific services you want to monitor with a webhook. Maybe you have alerts where it sends me information like every 1 minute. That might be better for a webhook. But then you may have another alert that says, send me every 5 minutes. That might be an email, right? So now you can kind of choose the routes that these alerts are going to start going to. So throughout this whole concept, when we were just releasing webhooks, I found a pretty cool site, honestly, online called webhook.site. And it just stands up an instant webhook receiver, and then we'll just print that data right onto your screen. And so as you're just kind of doing a quick test, like you're kind of kicking the tires, I found this site to be quite helpful. So I'm actually going to show you a couple of things of just standing up an alert system, capturing a test webhook, and then once we got the idea, I'm going to go through a couple of development tools like Postman, JSON Server, and ngrok, which you may or may not already be familiar with. It's quite common now in these workshops to use these core tools. But I'm just going to show you how to quickly stand up your own web server to capture these webhooks that you can actually use and index and do some cool stuff with. So now I pray to the demo gods. All right. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do, is this showing up? I'll make this bigger. Okay. All I've done is I've just logged on to my Meraki dashboard, okay? And I've just gone to network-wide and alerts, okay? So that brings up my alert settings. And again, these are just all of the different kind of probes within the Meraki system that you can monitor and send off an alert. So this is pretty standard. It's been here for, since as long as the dashboard's been around. The alerts, though, themselves have been growing with the products. Now, say that we have all these alerts. Now I want to actually send them to a webhook server. So the way that I do that is near the bottom, I would simply go through and add a server. So let me just clear all these out. Add a new server, but what server is that? Well, I need a webhook server. So real quick, I'm just going to go to webhook site, webhook.site. And when I go to enter here, it just automatically creates a random unique URL for me. Okay? So cool. Now I have a webhook server. I just went to a website. So I hit copy. It just copies that dynamic URL. And I can put it inside of my HTTP server. So I'm going to call this just test. Put in the URL here. I'm not going to add a password. Maybe I will. I'll just do something really silly. ASDF 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And now if I send a test webhook, it should receive at this site. Boom. So with that simple setup, I didn't even save anything. I was really just testing on an online site and testing if my server can talk to anybody, and it does. And that sample message was settings changed. It includes the organization ID for my network, the network name and organization name. It even includes a dynamic URL to the network or the place where the setting was changed, right? So now with this data, you can think about that. I can project this into a dashboard with a hyperlink. If there's a trouble ticket, I click on the link. It then opens the Meraki dashboard where I can start, sorting out the fault. So we really just give you the information in one single message so that you can do all of the events that you want to off of that. And again, so this was just a simple example where I sent it to this site. So if I want to do something a little bit more sophisticated here, maybe I want to kind of set up my own webhook kind of service, my own server itself. So what I've already done in advance is I've installed JSON server. It's a really simple, free open source tool. Effectively, all I did was npm install globally so I could use this anywhere, JSON server. So I would have run that. Now I have this JSON server tool available at my command line. So once that happens, all I'm going to do is run it. I'm going to say watch just so I can see fun stuff on the screen. And I'm naming the database. This database is simply just a JSON file, right? So that also makes it really helpful to test the data. Now I have it in JSON. I can plug this into a future app I'm working on, and I have sample information. So it works out to be really helpful. So if I run this server right now, great. It started like a really generic backend service with routes to post, comments, and profiles. I'm just going to really hijack the post route so that I can start sending webhooks to. But wait a minute, I have a problem. I can't send something from a cloud service to my local host, right? That's going to be a challenge. So that's where the other tool comes in handy called ngrok. How many of you have heard of ngrok? All right, cool. So if you haven't, again, it's another free tool. I've already installed it, but basically what it does is it exposes your local host to the web to a particular port that's running on your computer, right? So this way you don't have to configure your firewall, set up a port forward and a NAT rule and some firewall rules. If you're just doing a quick test, I run ngrok, and at that point, it just converted my service that was running on port 3000 to this dynamic URL. And so I can copy that. I can try to copy that. And now if I go back to this system here, let me just create a new one, add a new server. I'm going to call this just ngrok for now. A, B, C, D, F, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, I'm just going to save those changes and send a webhook test. Let's see if it went through. Oh. I got to add post because that's my new route. All right, let's try that again. Let's see if it works. Posts. All right, 201 created. Whew, it worked. All right. So now I've made it available to the internet. Now I'm actually accepting information. So that's pretty cool, but now I want to be able to capture more information than just this simple settings change that was generated by these tests. So what I can actually do is use a Postman collection to send this. Now this is all available, by the way, on Meraki.io. And Meraki.io is effectively the developer's site for the Meraki platform. Okay, so you're going to get all of your API docs here, including the reference guides and Postman collections where available. Okay, so for example, we're talking about webhooks. I could have clicked on the reference guide. It's going to give me all of this information about setting it up. So even if you didn't have this presentation, this is a lot of the core content here. It gives you the concept of the JSON, what this data is going to look like, common parameters. Also the Postman collection and links to these JSON servers and other examples. So all I've done here is effectively clicked on the Postman collection, and that would bring up my documentation for it. But really, I want to run in Postman so that I can actually send this sample data somewhere. So I say all that because now I can effectively paste or set my environment variable for my webhook receiver, and I'm just going to send a bunch of sample data to that. So let me find a good environment to play with. All right, so I can send this to localhost 3000/post. That should be fine. If I send, I can see that I was able to, again, send it, and if I were to look at my service, I should be able to see that I'm getting posts sent to it. All right, so what have I been sending to it? Well, we actually included a simple get for that local JSON server that you would be running, and so now if I hit send on here, let's see. Let me send a couple of examples here. Network usage alert. So if I actually send that, network usage alert, send some samples, send another sample, and then, well, that didn't work. 1 second. I need to find my server. And I'm going to go into Postman, set my environment to use that new address. That's all I'm doing here. And I'm going to see if this works. Well, that didn't work. It's all right. All I'm doing basically is I've created that server, and it's not showing. Oh, there we go. There's my post. I had something wrong on my URL. But effectively, every time I was sending something to this server, I was building up this giant JSON file. Right? So this is my JSON server file, and each one of these would actually contain some alerts. Okay? So that's all I was doing, and I was going to be able to pull some of these out just to show you, but that's really the core concept here. All right, so now that we've looked quite intensely at the JSON for just a second, I want to back out and just show you a couple of ways that you can really leverage this data and start making sense of it. So one of the demos that I've created that you can again get yourself on Meraki.io, if you type in Google Sheets, this is going to take you to a couple of basically Google Sheets that I've written applications for. And that allows you to use, effectively a free service, attach a script to it, and it can do cool things. One of which you can actually use it as a controller for the dashboard API. You can run reports against it. But first, I'm going to show you how I was able to effectively create a web server out of a Google spreadsheet. So what it does is effectively on a spreadsheet, I went to the script editor, and on the back of that, you can write your own JavaScript. Okay, it's actually Google Apps Script. So I say it's JavaScript until it's not, because you can't do a lot of libraries. There's a lot of funkiness that you can't do. But all that I really needed to do to make this work was create a webhook receiver and attach it to the back of this script. It's basically an accepting a post, if you can read that. So it's accepting a post, right? And from that, I basically did a bunch of other JavaScript to take a nested JSON and kind of flatten it into a spreadsheet based on rows and tabs of the sheet. So that's where I spent most of my midnight oil, but accepting the webhook was pretty straightforward. So now that I got this information, every time we send a webhook, we are now able to generate let me back out a little bit. I'm able to generate a new tab for each of the alert types, such as cameras went down, VPN connectivity changed, and for each event, I was able to create a new row. And all of that data, for example, this page, I was able to create a real-time graph of network usage. And I basically did a threshold of 10 megabits per second, and then I started watching Netflix and streaming a YouTube somewhere else. And I was able to just generate a whole bunch of alerts. And as I was capturing those, I would generate a quick little graph around that. So it's kind of a poor man's monitoring solution. But you yourself can build this here without much challenge. All you really have to do is create a new spreadsheet. And once you've created that web sheet, that spreadsheet, I have a GitHub file here that is basically just the JavaScript. And all you have to do is copy that out, paste it into your editor. Once it's pasted into here, from that point, you can just publish this as a web app, and that's the trick. So as soon as I do that, it creates this web URL. And so now that I have this web URL, I have a place where I can then configure my Meraki alerts, and it would have said, Google, and then I could paste that here. And then now I can send test webhooks to that, and it's going to send it to that spreadsheet. And it would just end up in maybe like settings changed or something like that. Let's see if I can find it. Settings changed. Yeah. So I would just send it right here. So there's a number of different ways that you can really capture this information. Webhooks aren't really that complicated. It's really what can you do with your imagination to take these alerts that are basically in JSON format and then shove it into your service. So taking a little bit farther, we have a program called Node-RED. I use this a lot to kind of hack together solutions as I'm testing out ideas. How many have you actually worked with Node-RED before? Ever seen it before? Really? All right, so for those of you who haven't, Node-RED is basically a tool for wiring the Internet of Things. It's built with Node.js in the background, but really think of it as kind of a DIY Zapier or IFTTT type system, but they give you full access to the JavaScript if you want it. So with Node-RED, I was able to quickly build a webhook receiver, and then from that point, create a bunch of sample flows that will trigger different automation tasks. And again, before I even analyze this, I'll just show you a real quick Node-RED 101 to show you how quickly it is to build a web server. So if I wanted to build a web server, I'm basically just dropping in an endpoint, and I'm just going to call this, demo. And I might want to write some message when they call me. So what I'm going to do is just going to respond by setting this message object. It's basically what is getting passed around in that wire. It's the message object. And that payload typically is where you're going to write anything interesting. So hello. Hello demo. That's exciting. All right. But now I would need to actually respond to the caller. Okay, so I've done all this. I've deployed my changes. Hopefully, great. So now all that did is really just create a new route to my Node-RED instance. Again, Node-RED, free tool. You can download it. It's included in Raspberry Pis as well, so it's basically there. So hello demo. I just wrote a web server in 10 seconds. Not a big problem. So same basic concept here. I could actually go back to Node-RED and I could create a post. So same sort of concept here, except now I'm going to set this as a post, and I'm going to just want to just show this message onto a screen. So I'm just pulling in this little debug object so I can see something. Okay. So now that I got that deployed, again, I can maybe go to Postman to create a quick post. So if I go to Postman, create a new post with this new route that I've created, and I say post, and I'm going to just send a body of just, hello from Postman, and I hit send. Great. So now it sent it to my Node-RED server. So if I actually check over here onto my Node-RED server and the debug, I should have shut all those other flows off. I would have seen, there we go, perfect. Hello demo. All right, so all that meant is I was able to quickly stand up a web server that can respond to a GET, and then it can also accept a post. Okay, now with those basics in mind, I've just created an endpoint called /alerts, and so now Meraki can send those events directly to my flow, right? So now I've just made a receiver for Meraki. And from that point, I am creating a bunch of different, flow possibilities that I could do from this. Maybe I want to send all of this data to a database, right? So in this instance, I'm taking all of those alerts and I'm simply sending it to a Firebase database. It looks something like this. And so now I have all of my events, and I can see, basically based on the event alert type, and then it's going to be categorized by time, and then more information around that. I think it was a big query. But you'll get the idea. So there's a bunch of events that will be in here. Maybe I want to send it to the Google Sheets. So instead of having to configure it directly on Meraki, I can just have it configured here as kind of a dispatcher, so I can choose what are my more important alarms that need to be categorized. But one of, I think, the more interesting concepts you can do with this is actually building an automation flow. Okay, so where you would traditionally have to pre-provision a network port, you might want to do this in an automated fashion. Okay. So in this example with this flow, what I'm trying to achieve here is that when you plug in a Meraki access point, or rather any access point, into a switch port, a Meraki switch port, we can fire off a webhook alert that says something was connected to this port. From that point, we can query that port and understand that this client has this MAC address, maybe these characteristics, and from there, we're going to say we trust this device, and we're going to automatically configure the port with the dashboard API so that it will set the VLAN settings and making sure that it has the right policies in mind. And that's all basically being triggered by a webhook alert that might look something like this, where we have, say, a switch port was connected. So that was the webhook that we received. And from that point, I can first analyze that by saying, well, what was the alert type? If it was switch port connected, now I'm interested in that alert. Now that I know that it's switch port connected, we're going to basically create a dashboard API call to query that device's client list. We want to know who's actually connected to it. At that point, we can figure out what port the client was connected to, because our dashboard API is going to return this information. And then, naturally, once we find it, we can make one more dashboard API call that basically fits in all the settings that we want to configure that switch port to, so that it automates that entire process. So again, this is just one example of how you could do it yourself, but you could really tie this into a lot of other types of systems like Ansible or Puppet, or your own custom solutions, or like something like ServiceNow. There's a lot of these different integration points now that we're providing with the Meraki APIs. Let me see if I've covered most things here. I'll pause it for just a second. Is there any questions? I've talked quite a bit, but does this all make sense? Do you guys get the value of the alert so far? Do you understand the JSON data that we can be working with? All right. So, as this a kind of a few extra things to talk about. I don't have a live demo for it, but I did mention we could tie into, say, something like PagerDuty. So again, PagerDuty is just an IT-type ticketing system where you can capture alarms. These might be SNMP traps or email-driven alerts, but they also provided a webhook receiver that will allow you to transform the Meraki payload, our JSON data, and effectively filter it into their system. And so that allows us to set things like the severity and the status and maybe the assignment. It was a really easy implementation, and it was basically just going onto their site. They gave you an API transformer. I then plugged in the details that they required, and they would give you a webhook URL, just like we saw in Google Sheets or in Grok or any of the other guys. At that point, I was able to send webhooks directly into their system. And really the kind of the last piece here, and this is a little bit more advanced, but if you would like, you can now use the dashboard API itself to configure your webhook servers, okay? So you don't have to go through the graphical interface like I just showed you, where you define your HTTP server, you define your alert settings. Again, that works well for one or two networks, but if you're going to be rolling out webhooks across 1,000 different sites, and each one needs to have their configuration set, you're going to want to use a dashboard API. So we really have 3 core endpoints for that. I'll just pop over real quick so you can see what that looks like. But it's basically a standard REST API that, well, it's not showing up there though. All right. Great. So we basically have HTTP servers, just like you saw before that we had, where you configured that on the dashboard interface. Now you can also list them out through the dashboard API, which you'd basically be going to this endpoint to pull out that information. It's going to give you a list of your servers. Again, you can see an example using ngrok here. You can also make changes, update those servers, all pretty straightforward if you're comfortable with using a dashboard API. It's just a standard REST interface to make those changes. Same goes where you can now also set your alert settings, where you can get a sense of, are these going to be email alerts, SNMP, or do you need to set up an HTTP server there for that? And that's the basic idea. Again, there was a lot of information I covered. Meraki.io is definitely going to be the place that you want to go for all of this information. We have a lot of learning labs that tied in with the DevNet Learning Lab system. Okay, so if you're familiar with those, you can start by finding the Meraki Learning Labs at our site here. We also have a number of build guides. So again, if you wanted to figure out how to integrate with PagerDuty, you would type in PagerDuty, and you're going to find an article around that, how we've integrated with it. Same goes for ServiceNow, or if you wanted to just type in like a general language like Python or Node, we have a ton of articles, is the moral of the story. But we're also going to show you the core reference guides, the API docs. You're going to want to really start here if you're serious about it, because this basically gives you your Postman collections and the general how the APIs work. If you just want to stay current on what's new is the place to be. You can see we're releasing a ton of new API endpoints almost every month now. APIs used to be almost an afterthought, in the years past. Now it's an API first strategy. So anytime you think Meraki is going to release a new feature, our goal is to have an API first, build our UI on top of that, and then let you build your own UI as desired. All right, that's at least the idea, and you can see a lot of progress with this. So it's a very exciting time to be watching this. And then our community as well. If you're just curious, you don't have a support ticket, but you want to just kind of get some more information from your peers, our community is quite active under solutions and APIs. I mean, the good and the bad is all in here. It's an open forum, but we as Merakians will actually monitor this. So if a question hasn't been answered, we're notified. We're going to make sure that you actually get some real answers when using this forum. Okay, I'll post a lot of my samples and other things like that as well. But it's a really good place to stay connected to us all. That's really the main thing. I mean, webhooks aren't that complicated, so I didn't need to dwell on for a full hour here. But if you do have any other questions, if you want to talk about any of your use cases, we're just over here. We'll be hanging out under the co-creation space, just like for Meraki, and one of us will be there to answer any of your questions and show off any of the demos. All right? Great. Thanks everybody for your time.